take up too much. Excellent. So thank you so much for everybody who's joining. Just a little bit about who I am. My name is Ildi Seke, and I am a consultant working for John Casey at the Educational Advocates. I joined Joan about 2 years ago. A little bit of my background and how I got here. I started my education career as a high school language arts teacher out in California. I taught there 5 years in the public education system, so I had quite a lot of experience with the students who came in a 504 and IEP. Although that was over, ooh, do I show my age? Over like, I would say 15 years ago when I started out. So I think the special education was quite different at that time. So luckily we have come a very long way. And then from there, I came to the East Coast and I worked at Landmark School, which is a high school primarily for students with learning disabilities. And it was very eye-opening, and I loved my job and working with students who just, think differently and very creative and help them along in their educational career. And then I ended up at Northeastern University in Boston in the disability services, and then finally at Boston College, where I worked for 7 years coordinating services for students with learning disabilities and ADHD and a lot of comorbid disabilities, actually. And I have them coordinate, adjust to the college, have them with the accommodations. I read tons of neuropsychs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. So I want to touch upon a few things. I'm going to try to keep this short, maybe like 25 to 30 minutes, and then give you an opportunity to ask questions. But I will talk about whether to disclose, not to disclose. That's always been a big question during the admission cycle. I'm going to touch a little bit upon the optional SATs, ACTs, whether you to submit scores or not for students with learning disabilities and ADHD. We talk about the documentation guidelines a little bit of what you have right now and what you will need when you're journeying into the college environment. A little bit talk about college list building for students who learn differently. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the accommodations that exist and the types of accommodations in college. So this is always comes up whether to disclose or not to disclose. Interestingly, I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you're on an IEP and sometimes even on a 504 in a public school system, it shows up on your transcript, right? Because it shows up that you are in a study skill class, or if you not, if you don't take certain amount of classes, maybe you have only time for 4 or 5. The admission people will know. It's kind of a hint. Sometimes it's not so obvious, but on other cases, like I work with clients who have no foreign language, right, on their transcript. And then that's also like very telling for the admission. Sometimes, as we speak, even in the case of my nephew, like if you have a executive functioning and ADHD, sometimes you make decisions that not necessarily the brightest, right? Because you really don't think about consequences. So you could have something on your transcript that it includes a suspension or some disciplinary action. So in 10 years ago, maybe it was that used to be like, oh, don't disclose, but it's completely fine to disclose to schools, especially so they are aware of some of the discrepancies on the transcript. And one way you can disclose is, like sometimes you can ask the school counselor to put it in a recommendation with your permission, right? So you can ask them. There are on the common application additional section where you could say a brief explanation of the discrepancies, or usually like I work with a client, they have a language waiver, or they haven't, and then it says I received a language waiver in high school. So that's, not a red flag for the admission step, like why that's not on it. Sometimes if you have a, math disability and then you're taking, like a lower level math courses, any case, you could give that brief statement on the common application. Or sometimes if you have an interview, you can disclose that during an interview, but we don't always err on the side of do that with the admission counselor. Sometimes interviews can be with a upperclassman or an alumni. So in that case, I wouldn't. A lot of times people, like clients, come to me, it's like, well, I want to talk about that in my essay. And I said, well, you know, I would stay away from that, because everyone's going to talk about how, oh, I had dyslexia, I had ADHD. You can briefly mention it, but that should not be the primary focus of the essay. It's more about, you know, like a creative writing assignment, a story, a unique story about you. It shouldn't be focusing on like the hardships, what it's regarding to. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's a little bit of cliche, right? Cliche that, yeah, I had this difficulty and overcame it. So I would stay away from the essay. You can briefly mention it, but I wouldn't focus on it wholeheartedly. And I would move forward, but, ooh, sorry. I think I'm having technical difficulties. Not sure why. Sorry. Of course, I have technical difficulties. Okay. Oops. All right, test optionals. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So here is another question I always get. Should I go test optional? And this is such a tough subject lately because things are constantly changing, right? So after COVID, everybody went test optional, right? And then after that, a couple of years, people are saying, oh, make sure you submit your scores if you're in around the 50 percentile. And as you know, like things are really changing. So I always recommend for students, take a test, take the SATs and the ACTs and see, you know, which one is better for the students. There is a lot of literature that goes back and forth. Some say, oh, the ACT is much better for students with learning disabilities. And there's literature that says the SATs are better. I say, take them both, see which one is better for you. With the digital SAT, it's a little bit, you know, easier because it's a shorter reading passage. You're allowed to use the calculator right now, and it's only 2 hours long. So that's a pro for students who, you know, can pay attention for that long. But the ACTs are still paperwork, and sometimes that works better for students. And it also has a science section. So if a student is good at science and be able to interpret and read graphs better, then again, the ACTs are better. So take it and see which one better, which one works for you. And then sometimes I would say, if you have the middle percentage of the school, then submit it. But then again, it will be different from college to college. If you have a really low score, I would not submit, right? And then make that decision with your guidance counselor or the consultant you're working with and have that discussion. If you don't submit the test scores, then it's really gonna be on the grades and the rigor. I had clients last year who got into like some top schools like Harvard and Brown without a test score. So again, it's really not a detriment to your application. But as you know, if you're reading and you're following, and I would like to make sure that this works. Haley, can you move, like, are you able to manage my PowerPoint? Because for some reason it's not working for me.
I'm not, I'm sorry.
Okay. So here's just a little bit of a landscape, right? So things are changing. There are certain states that do require the testing, right? So like if you want to go to a Florida public school or you want to go to Georgia public schools, they do require the SATs, right? And then a few strictlers around New England, right? Like if you want to be the Georgetown, then yes, submit your scores because it's required, Purdue requires, and schools like MIT. But even as we speak, we just had a presentation maybe a week or so ago where colleges still were trying to decide whether to go test optional or not. That's why I have a few crossed out already. Like Stanford decided to continue the test optional policy. Dartmouth, on the other hand, reinstated the SATs. Vanderbilt extended test optional. Cornell extended test optional. So it's really interesting too, like what Cornell will do, because if you want to apply to the business school in Cornell, then it's test blind, right? Blind means they don't even look at your test scores, like WPI or the entire public school of University of California, right? California institutions, they do not consider it. It's actually test blind. So again, my recommendation, take it, see how your student does, and then maybe work on it a little bit, take it again. And if you look at each schools where you apply and make that decision on a school by school basis. But as I said, I had plenty of clients with learning disabilities and ADHD who went test optional and got into the top schools. And then this is just an interesting statement from Clark. University in Worcester, they really, and they stand by their test optional policy, and it says it will not hurt you or help you in any way if you, and I heard admission counselor says if you submit a low score, it's really hard to unsee a low score. So if you feel like you have a lower score, I would err on the side of going test optional. I do want to touch base. I think this is the biggest question sometimes I have is, what documentation do I need to have, and how does that translate to the college environment? Remember, laws change. As soon as you turn 21 and graduate from high school, you are no longer under the individualized education plan. It's no longer protected by the educational law. You're going into the Americans with Disability Act. So even the word 504. So 504 plan, as they say it, is a plan that the high schools put together. The 504 is a law that does carry over, but the plan itself does not. So I think that can get a little bit of confusing for parents. But what about documentation? And I see this a lot. So if you are on an IEP, right, individualized educational plan, it's by federal law, the high schools are mandated to retest your child every 3 years. So don't waste the money, have the schools retest. And always err on the side of having an updated documentation for colleges. Colleges do vary what their requirements are, but they really like to see that your documentation is within a 3 to 5 year range. And they really prefer, again, some colleges, like I can say Northeastern is very strict about it. They want to see documentation testing on an adult measure. That means once you turn 16, you can test and ask the clinician, please do all these tests on the cognitive test and the achievement test on the adult measures. And that way you have that will carry the student all the way to graduate school. Even if you're not thinking about graduate school, nice thing to have. So if you are on the cusp of whether, if you're in a sophomore or junior, wait till 16 and have them reevaluate. Have the high school do it. They might give you some pushback, and then by law, they have to. 504 is a little bit trickier, right? So 504, sometimes a lot of ADHD students go on a 504 under other health impairment. High schools may not be able to, like, they kind of push back on the evaluation because in order to diagnose an ADHD, you have to be a licensed psychiatrist, right? Or licensed clinician neuropsychologist. So high school usually does a psychoeducational evaluation. So the psychological portion where they do the cognitive, the processing, the verbal comprehension, that does the high school, the school psychologist who does that, right? And the educational portion is the special educator, right? That does the math, the reading, and all that. And then they come back together and then they decide, as a team called the IEP team, and then see what the accommodations. So in short, always err on updating. It is an expensive route. I totally know that. So if the school can do it for you, do it with the school. If you have already a neuropsych in the 7th or 8th grade, wait till end of the junior year summer or even the senior year summer, do the updated evaluation, and you're done for the rest of your, adult life. And again, the documentation will carry. So here are the things to save. Colleges will ask you for the most recent evaluation, and they will ask you for the high school plan. So if you're an IEP, make sure you keep a copy of that. If it's a 504 plan, make sure you keep a copy of that. And if you are in a private school, they still have a plan. Sometimes they call it 504, or they call it an accommodation plan. It's usually just a 1-page and printout of all the support the student received. Have that in case you want to request accommodations once you get to college. The other thing you want to know is, I know it's sometimes you want to do all the work for your child, but sometimes it's important to push them to read or even know what these reports say. And I know the reports can be overwhelming because it's sometimes hard to interpret what the clinicians say. I know that the clinicians, if you're doing a comprehensive neuropsych, they will not release the report until they sit down with you and explain. Take your child with you. I assume they're there, and then have them even read just the at the end the descriptions. When I worked at Boston College, because what happens is when you get to college, right, the laws change. Even the FERPA, and I touch base upon a little bit. You no longer, like, the student has to advocate for themselves, right? So you cannot go into the college and say, this is what I want for my child to receive. It has to be student driven. So the student has to walk in the office and say, these are my issues, these are my learning needs, these are the accommodations I want to request. It's called the I'm blanking. Sorry, I'll come back to it. There is the fancy word of what the disability specialists call it. Oh, interactive process. Sorry, it's called the interactive process. So you sit down with the child. So why is this important that the student knows how to describe? Because they will ask you, what were the accommodation you received? What worked for you? What are the support you are looking forward to? What are some of the disabilities you have, or the learning needs that you face, issues that you face? So sometimes it's really important, as the student gets to your junior, senior level, they know how to describe their learning needs, right? These are some of the questions I'm putting up that a disability specialist will or may ask a student. So again, prompt them to know how to express their needs. Some of the things, consider too, before you embark on the college. And as you know, cognitively, students who have a learning disability, ADHD, cognitively, they develop much later. We always said when we were working in the college level that they are a year or two behind. And you probably know because their decision making is not there. So sometimes taking a gap year might make sense. But if they resist, just have this, make sure that you do a college readiness assessment. And then that's just not just about the academics, right? That could be the social aspect too. Are you ready to live alone? Are you ready to do your own laundry? Do you know how to wake yourself up every day? Do you know how to, make sure you have all the assignments with you when you go to school? Do you know how to live with a peer? Do you know how to refill your prescriptions? Do you know where to get this and that support? So these are some of the questions that you want to make sure you're ready for, the student's ready for when leaves your house behind. Also, learning about the disability offices. Is not all disability offices are created equal, and we will talk about this a little bit later on in the slide. So get familiar with the words, the language. Go onto the college's website when you're looking for whether that's a right fit or not. And also the campus culture. Like, it's important when you're looking for the college list, is what is the campus culture? Is it competitive? Is it collaborative? Do they have hands-on assignments? Is my child going to sit in a lecture of 200 on the freshman year? Do I have to take foreign language? Is that even a requirement? How can I get out of that? So will I thrive in an environment where I have to advocate and see my professors only once a week? Or will I be able to see my professors and ask questions every day? So again, what are the clubs and organizations that these schools have that will excite me? And again, with the programs too, if I'm undecided, do I want to go to school when I'm stuck in a certain track, or do I want to go to school when I can still explore what may be my interests? So these are just creating a solid colleges. These are just some information or resources I wanted to share with you and questions to ask when it comes to, assessments, colleges. Like, do I want to go to, even like things that you don't think about, like some colleges very exam heavy, right? That's like, so if I have a student who really doesn't do well on exams, right? Because they're more project-based, they have a more project-based brain, like maybe I will start looking for colleges that are, a little bit more flexible on that part. And why is that? Because a lot of times we forget that we have to meet the guidelines of the college when we apply for them. Like, and then I will talk about this in the next slide, that if you are on an IEP, right, the individual education plan, that means you are receiving some kind of modifications by nature. Modifications could be like, oh, you don't have to type things. You could give an oral, or you don't, or an oral version of, of the assignment, or they're modifying the curriculum for you. That will not happen in college. There is no more modification when it comes to learning disabilities and ADHD, meaning the student will have to meet the curriculum, the entire curriculum, and they can receive accommodations to meet those, but you do have to meet the guidelines, and you have to complete the curriculum. And here's an example. I had students like, I can't write all those essays. I want to make sure that I do oral exams only. And that's not going to happen if it's in the syllabus, in the curriculum, that the expectations of the course that you do have to submit that, then you have to submit that. If it's in a curriculum that you have to meet 2 years of languages, then you have to do that. Unless you're able to request a language waiver through the Disability Services Office, then you can get out of that. I think that's the only type of modification I've ever encountered in college, is the waiver of the foreign language. And then again, academic support is not just for LD, ADHD, and this is where I want to really concentrate on that. Not all colleges are, again, created equal when it comes to academic support. And then some colleges do much better job, right? And that's for every student. Like, you don't have to have a disability to access this. And this could be a very important part of the college search process too. Do they have tutoring services? And what does that look like? Some colleges will have it, but they are all over campus, right? They have a math tutors in the math department. They have the writing tutors in the library. They have, content physics tutors in the physics department. Someone who has, executive functioning issues, they're going to have a hard time navigating, like, where do I go for support? There are colleges who now centralize those support, which is like, for example, at BC, it's centralized, which is really nice. You go to the Connor Center and you find the writing support, the content support. The other nice things that are emerging now in most colleges is the academic coaching, which one things I advocated at BC is to be available for all students. Academic coaching is basically executive functioning help. You can meet with an academic coach and they will help you to demystify the syllabus, right? Or help you organize for courses, or maybe help you, like, maybe it's not a good idea to take 5 classes on Monday and have no classes on Tuesday, right? Like, what are you going to do and how are you going to structure that time? Or maybe it's not a good idea to have 3 classes back to back when you're receiving extended time, because then you always have to be negotiating with the professor, like, when can I take my exam? I have to go to my next class. And there are professors who will say, you have to take it with the class. There is no exception. And then, it becomes an issue. But that's available for all students. And then you move beyond that when you're requesting accommodations. And I think I touched based upon this earlier, but the accommodations are in the central office, and they sometimes call it differently just to confuse you even further. So they either call the Disability Services Office, sometimes they call the Accessibility Services Office. And in Boston College case, it's 2 separate offices, which it still blows my mind why they do that. But they have the Disability Services, and they have that Connors Family Learning Center, where all the students with learning disabilities and ADHD register. But in any case, you have like the students, once you get accepted, let's say May, you make your deposit, you can start really looking at how do I disclose, how do I request accommodations to make sure that I have everything set up by the time I start. And the biggest mistake, and I talk about this in a little bit, I have seen students come into BC and Northeastern make is like, oh, I'm good. I don't need it. I outgrew my outgrew my accommodations. Like I no longer need the extended time, or I no longer need this. The issue is that when you get to college, right, the amount of work quadruples, right? You are no longer in a structured environment, right? Because now you get up at 8 or 7 or whatever your time is, you go to school, boom, 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 go to your extracurriculars afterwards. Then you go home and do your homework. College doesn't look like that. And when you throw someone that is exactly functioning into that environment, whew, it's completely, everything goes out. Sometimes, these are the type of students who schedule an 8 a.m. class and they can never make it there. So they will need some of that support. It's like, hey, let me help you, figure out how to schedule your courses that works for you. Let me help you set up the extended time. You don't have to use it if you don't need it, which is the nicest thing about college, but it's set up for you. So if you have a math exam that you'll say, I think I'm going to need that extra time for it, you can go to the center and use the extra time. Or if you are in a lecture of 150 and you have ADHD, good luck, right? Trying to focus, right? So that is the case. Oh, I do need a distraction reduced environment. And then I can go and make sure that that's set up for me. The nice thing about college, once you set up those accommodations your freshman year, you're done. It carries you over all 4 years. All you have to do each semester is request those letters, the accommodation letters to your professors, to let them know you are getting these accommodations and you're all set, right? The other thing you want to do, and I love this, and this is becoming an amazing thing at some of the colleges, is their pre-orientation summer program. Sometimes there are colleges who provide, just for learning disabilities or students with disabilities, a pre-orientation or summer program. I believe Curry College does that, which is beautiful, right? You get to the campus 1 week early or even earlier, and they help you figure out how to navigate the school. There are schools who does it for all students, like Eckerd College, and then I think Salve Regina, they have Eckerd College in Florida has 3 weeks of that. And then I think Salve has a 1 week, and then that's just a beautiful thing. So that's something that you want to make sure that part of your college search too. Is it's a nice way to, to help transition into the college life. And then briefly, I want to touch upon this has changed a little bit, the levels of support. We call them the basic, the coordinated, and structured support. I think nowadays, because luckily the education, the special education support, even in higher education, has come a really long way. Even from the 10 years I was at BC, it's just changed dramatically. So I even feel like basic service is no longer basic. But basic means, like, as you know, by federal law, every college is supposed to provide accommodations. Every college will have a disability services or accessibility services office where students can register to get their accommodations, right? So that's by law is given. Now, if you go to a small school that's, let's say, 1,200, and they have a basic service, I mean, you're going to get the support. You can disappear in a classroom of 12, right? So that might be enough. Coordinated services, and even basic services, like I have Elan there, but Elan is not really basic. My students with LD thrive there. They do have additional support, right? Like this could be academic coaching, workshops that might not be part of the disability services office, but all students get it. Coordinated services, when it's a larger schools, like I consider BC a coordinated services, where they one step, they have the support, the disability services, but they also have additional tutoring, content tutoring, academic coaching. You can meet with a specialist once or twice a week. And that way you have, that additional support set up for you. The structured programs are a little bit unique. The structured programs are usually about 90% of the time fee-based. So you actually go to the college, register with the disability services, and you say, well, that's not enough support. I'm going to pay for the structured support. In this structured support, they specialize services just for your student. Doesn't mean they modify curriculum. They're just specialized services. So that means you may have a learning specialist or a professional executive functioning coach who will meet with you twice a week or as many times you need it to make sure that the student is succeeding. But it usually tends to be a fee-based program. Like famous colleges that have that, Curry College have it, American University have it, Denver, University of Denver, Syracuse, Marist, University of Arizona. All these colleges have this fee-based structured support. Northeastern has a fee-based structured support as well. And then quickly, I want to talk about what is an accommodation. And I don't want to talk about every single one of them, but I do want to highlight a few. Accommodations are what students can actually qualify for that will help them succeed in school. Similar to the 504 and IEP plan, again, it's just not modification. Like extended time carries over, super easy. Reduce distraction. Note-taking, that depends. So what is note-taking, right? So that can be a interesting subject when it comes to note-taking, because in high school, you might mean that, oh, you get the notes of the teacher. I'm telling you this, the professor in college will not give you their notes. Not gonna happen. What usually happens in college is either you have a peer note taker, like someone that, like Northeastern hires a peer note taker who can come in and they take their notes and they hand it to the student. But a lot of colleges are moving away from that because it's not becoming really effective, because and then because other colleges, what they did, they can't afford to hire someone. They just have a volunteer peer who takes notes and anonymously hands it over to the student. The problem is here is like when I'm taking notes, what's important to me might not be important to you, right? We all process information quite differently. So what colleges are not doing, they're moving away. And instead of note-taking services, they call it note-taking assistance. So they provide some kind of assistive technology. When I was at BC, they were starting to move over Glean. So Glean is like an audio capture. It captures the audio and it transcribes it as well onto either the student's phone or the computer, which is a beautiful service. Sometimes you get frictions with some professors who say, no, you cannot record me. So there's a lot of that can happen. But the two things I do want to mention that I think is an important accommodation that's often parents don't know, and I want to highlight, is reduce course load. It's usually never advertised on a college's website on their disability. But basically what it means is you can ask, can I take a reduced course load? So CARE, instead of general, it's a 15 credit. You go to college, you take 5 courses, it's a 15 credit, because you have to graduate within 4 years with 120 credits. But if you feel you're nervous and you say your student's not going to be able to handle all that, can we start out with a reduced course load? Means you're only taking 12 credits or 4 classes. And if you are qualified for that, they will say, yes, of course. Now that's the first step. But the next step, now what? Right? Like, how am I going to catch up? Right? Because now I'm behind my freshmen, the rest of the freshmen, the end of the first year. A lot of colleges now compensate, like, well, you can take these courses over the summer. So you can take 1, 2 in the summer, like in the same session, or just break it up. Student may resist because they want to enjoy their summer, of course, but sometimes it's just a nice way to break up. But here's the key, and this is what, take down this, and ask at the disability services when you do that, what is the tuition looks like for that, right? So this is like a hidden secret at BC. Like if you qualify for a reduced course load, they will, and you are registered with a learning disability or ADHD, the tuition is waived for those courses, right? Because you already paid for it. That's not always the case for every school, but this is a really nice perk sometimes to ask, like, is my tuition waived for those courses if I'm taking a reduced course load? Foreign language waiver is the other one. So if you have a severe LD and you actually qualify, you didn't have any language during your high school year, it's a lot easier to ask for a foreign language waiver than if you have taken maybe 2 years, right? Because like, for example, at BC, they say, well, I want you to try it and see how you fare, and then you can apply for a language waiver. But that's always also should be part of the research process. See if the colleges even require a language in most liberal arts colleges will. So that's where the icky part comes in. Private dorm room, oof, depends on the school, right? What's the reason? I can tell you this, at BC, for if you had an ADHD, it was not an excuse. They did not consider that as a valid excuse for requesting private rooms. A lot of colleges don't have enough rooms, right? So for a private dorm room, you really have to have like a medical reason for that. And then just quickly, here are the things that usually not gonna be granted. You're not gonna get a word bank in college. You're not gonna get a study guide in college. Flexibility with attendance, that depends. I don't know if you guys following the news, but UMass Amherst just released how they released an article how they actually strengthening like making that more strict, that policy, because a lot of people they use that like they were really bit like they overused that. So basically, inflexible in attendance generally is approved on a medical reasoning. Like if you have a reason, like a medical reason you can't attend, or something, a flare up on an issue, like on a medical issue, you cannot make it to class. Most colleges will be very strict to how many courses you can miss. If they say like if it's this, they sometimes they say if the medical reason is so severe, you should take a leave of absence and come back. So again, be careful on that one. And alternative testing methods, like if you can write or can, like if the requirement in a speech class is to speak, then you have to speak. If the requirement is to participate, you have to participate. It's not like you please don't pick on me. And extended deadlines, again, I have rarely seen that, and it's usually medical reasons. You have the syllabus, so work with a coach who can write down when these assignments due and help you plan it out. For an LD ADHD, you very unlikely will you ever get an extended deadline on assignments or papers. And I think I'm gonna jump ahead because we talked about these. And I want to talk about the biggest mistakes to avoid, right? Not getting your testing updated, a big one. I had dealt with a lot of freshmen at BC who regret that. Like they come back in freshman year and they say, I really want accommodations, I'm struggling. And their evaluation was when they were in 5th grade. And there's nothing you can do. Like how your learning disability ADHD is affecting you in your academics is very different now when you're 19 and 18 when you were, when you were in 5th grade. So, and then as you know, getting tested takes a long time. You have to find a clinician. You have to get tested, which is a long one. They wait about a month before they write the report. So that sets the student back an entire semester before they can get those accommodations done. So when in doubt, update. Again, I think that waiting for SATs to request accommodations, I don't think is that relevant anymore because high school is now very much streamlining that. Like it's so much easy now. If you have if you qualify for extended time in high school, the schools will help you out to get that accommodation on the SATs and ACTs. Again, the students not being honest with themselves whether they're ready for college or not. And that's a big one. It's totally okay to take a gap year. Gap year, I had a lot of students this past year, 2 years, who applied, got accepted, and they deferred their admission for an extra year. They worked, they got some other experience, they worked on their executive functioning skills, so they felt like they're better starting the school year. Choosing a college with not enough support is another one too. Like a lot of times I have kids like, I want to go to a big rah-rah school and it has to be a large institution. I want to have party. I want to have a Greek life. And I'm like, okay, so describe me how you learn best. Like, oh, I like small classrooms. I like discussion, collaboration. I'm like, okay, so let's, readjust what kind of support they will have. And sometimes it can work. Like if you want to go to a University of Arizona and you're part of the SALT program, then yeah, it can work. It can definitely work. If you want to go to a larger school, but you don't have a structured support, now there are amazing companies out there. And not just to name drop here, but I've been working with Focus Collegiate with a lot of my students who they have this executive functioning coach they meet outside of the school, and they walk them through their entire year, and they work with them twice a week or even 3 times a week to make sure to work on those executive functioning skills if the college doesn't have that. So there are alternative options. Ignoring advice, again, I have seen this hands-on. If you're, and I have recommended this as a specialist at BC. I had kids who came in, I read their report, red flag, say, I think it would be wise to take a reduced course load. No, I can't handle it. And then ended up, dropping. So the nice thing is that in college, you could still withdraw, or drop a course. They have a drop at period, which is really nice. I think it's a 2-week period. And then you can withdraw. There's a time period when you can withdraw from the school, but for example, at BC, you will have that W on your transcript when it's indicated you withdrew from the class. Not a big deal, but I think having the idea of taking a reduced course load if needed is important. And then this is the advice for you parents. Do for your children doing for them, what they can do for themselves is actually hurting them, right? So if they are a junior, senior, make them pick up the phone and call the doctor's appointment, have them refill their prescription, have them do their laundry, have them, make sandwiches, or just a little step by step, the things that they can do for themselves. And I know that it's hard, but it's really ultimately will help them tremendously when you got to college. So I feel like I ran over, sorry. I just had a lot of information to share, but if you have questions now about disclosing, about documentations, about accommodations, please do not hesitate to ask.
Ildi, we have one question in the chat right now that says, can the student do a reduced course load and take 5 or 6 years to complete college instead of within 4 if that's the pace they need?
Depends on the college. That's again a conversation you have to have with the admission, with the disability services office, and even admissions sometimes. I know BC is very touchy about that. They really want to kick people out in 4 years, although I have worked with kids who were there for a lot longer. But I think they do draw a line, and do you really want to pay that much money to have them 6 years? So usually the reduced course load works that they take summer courses. And then it helps with the student too, because don't you want them to graduate with their own peers? So on the other hand, I have seen sometimes if students are not ready for that, I keep bringing BC up. Sorry about that, but I worked there for a long time. They have the evening school, they studied at the Woods College, right? So if you live at home, start at the Woods College, and then you transfer over to the main institution. That's another pathway to do if you're not ready for the regular living on campus as well. And then there are colleges too, that allows, I have a client this year who got into an amazing school, business school, but he's close enough and the college allows that they live at home on the first year, right? Because most colleges will require the students to live on campus, and that can be very difficult for some students. So this particular college, it could be part of the college list. If they allow you to live at home and you can commute, that will take the stress away too from the students to transition.
We have another question, which is, if you have a student who has very good grades and loves languages despite having ADHD, do you advise disclosing before or after being admitted?
I mean, the colleges will know. I mean, you don't feel like you have to disclose. If there's nothing, disclosing is depends on the school. If I go to Curry College, I will disclose or Dean College or Elon, they're specialized to have those students. But if you want to go under the radar and you don't think that's a relevant information for the admission to know, then don't. You can make the decision. Disclosing, and then here's a key one: do not disclose. Do not give your documentations to the admissions, because the admissions will not take your documentations to the disability services office. And I have encountered so much of that while I worked at BC. It's what we disclose to the admission. I'm like, they don't communicate with us. They can't. It's there. That's like that. That's not happening. So if you feel like you don't want to disclose on your application, that's fine. But if you want to request accommodations, you have to disclose to the Office of Disability Services office. And generally the colleges will know, because the Disability Services office will work with the, other members of the community, like the professors or maybe the advising office. So there will be some kind of a communication between those offices. I hope that answered the question. I feel like that was another question in there.
No, that was just one of the attendees thanking you and saying, but that can happen after admission. I see. So that's
Yeah, so
available.
disclosure happens most of the time after admission. I would disclose if there's a big discrepancy in the transcript, if there is no languages, or if there is some kind of I have students who had they had a health issue, and they skipped the semester or came back. I had students who had 2 different high schools because of that. So like those are or I had students who got I shouldn't be laughing, but got accepted, and then they actually ended up being asked to leave the school because they made a silly mistake, right? And then you have to disclose to the school. So those are the extreme cases. But admission, you do not have to, like, the disclosure for accommodations happens with the Disability Services office.
We do have one question I didn't see before that says, I am unclear about the timeline for disclosure. Would sharing the IEP only happen after the student has been accepted and is applying for accommodations?
Yes, absolutely. You cannot request accommodation. And then, so again, when you go to your visit, like, so that's the thing about colleges too. Like, some colleges are really welcoming if you're on a tour and then you happen to go by the Disability Services office, or you email them ahead of time, like, hey, would you have some time with us to talk about your accommodations? Some colleges are very welcoming and say, yes, we can talk about your child specifically because we have to review, but we can give you some general ideas of what accommodations and what support we have. So that should be an important part of the tours. And there are some colleges, I experienced this before, who will not give you the time of the day, right? But like, they were so busy, they're not going to be able to talk to you. So you're really kind of relying on their website. But disclosure really, so what happens is you get admitted, around, if early action, November or March, you deposit May 1st, right? When you make a decision. And then in the summer, that's when you start disclosing, right? And then sooner the better. And then look at the college's timelines, because sometimes the disclosure can be like, if you need housing accommodations, right? You might need to disclose sooner, because you want to make the deposit and you want to enroll in that. Hey, I want to have a single room, or what, you want to make sure that it's set up, or read their documentation guidelines, and you don't meet them quite yet because your documentation out of date, then it will still have some time for you in the summer to update. But generally speaking, disclosure happens after you're admitted.
That's all we have so far. If you do have a question that you haven't asked, feel free to put it in the chat.
No, I'm opening. Okay, I answered it. Okay.
We got one more if we have time for it, Ildi.
Yeah.
I understand the student needs to be asked by the student, but if a student has a communication disability, how do you suggest they request accommodations without assistance?
Well, so again, you have to ask yourself is, will he be ready? Will the students be ready for the college? And will the student be able to advocate for himself or herself? Is he ready? That's where the readiness comes in, because you're not going to be with them in the classroom, right? You're not going to be with them going into the professor's room. So the disability services office, they're specialized, they're professional staff who have a background, right, in disability, so that the students will have to communicate in one of ways of what the support will this person will need, right? So I have encountered very different disability stuff. Sometimes they said, stay outside of the room. And then I think it was just recently too, I forgot which college. The parent had to sit outside. You had the conversation, right, with the student, and then the intake of tell me about your, what you need, what are some of the support you received. And then they invited this parent in and say, all right, here's what we talked about. Is there any additional things you would like to tell us, right? But if the student is not ready, then maybe they're just not ready to be in that environment. And that's, again, that's a tough question to handle, because we want to make sure that the student, I mean, I had parents who called in for arranging tutoring for their kid in college, and the staff who was taking the phone calls are peers, and I'm like, no, we can't do that. The student has to come and ask. So advocating for them is fine, but they might ask you to stay outside. You could just say to a disability services specialist, like, can I come in after and talk to you and see, what did he say and what are the support that he will receive?
We do have one other question that says, are there suggestions you have for kids with LD to beef up their application when they are low on things like honors courses?
Extracurriculars are always big, right? I mean, it's definitely, and I know that's a really tough one too, because when you are on an IEP, like, or 504, you have that extra class, right? So I hear so many times the kids are frustrated. I'm frustrated. I can't do the electives because I have to go to, to the services. And what sometimes you do is like, okay, what can we do in the summer? Are there any courses you could take in the summer? Pre-college programs, online courses. Online courses not always work for students with LD, ADHD, but pre-summer courses that you could do, extracurriculars you could do. That's where you usually compensate for the lack of academic rigor. And that goes a very long way too.
I think that's it. We just have a few more minutes left. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and pop in our president, Joan Casey's Calendly link. If you are interested in learning more about what we offer at Educational Advocates College Consulting, you can go ahead and click this link and schedule a 20-minute complimentary meeting with Joan.
I'm just looking at the chat. I hope I answered all your questions. I know this is a lot of information, but if I'm happy to, if you email me, I'm more than happy to answer any personal questions you may have. Thank you so much, everyone.